Hey there, YouTube. Today I really wanted to talk about a story from COVID times. So I know that we all have our own COVID stories. We all have our own ways that we coped with it, that we didn't cope with it, the ways that we kept in contact, and the ways we did not. And for me, I definitely got very isolated for a good portion of COVID, especially the first few months were really rough. Not being able to see anyone, especially being such a social person as I try to be, it was tough to not being able to interact. So for a few months, I didn't reach out to anyone. I didn't make much of an effort, or if I did, I would send texts and I wouldn't get replies. So having experienced that, I got this sensation that, people didn't really care that much. If they weren't responding or if they weren't the ones reaching out, then perhaps they didn't want to talk. They didn't want to engage. They didn't want to have me check in. And so I kind of got really in my head and lost. And then I saw a few pieces of media that really helped break me free from this like stupor of depression. But the one that really, really helped would be a show called The Midnight Gospel. The Midnight Gospel is a weird show. Let's just put it that way. It's actually audio clips that are related to a podcast that talk a lot about spiritual, psychological elements of life, kind of take deep dives on like what makes us tick in a very abstract, almost esoteric way. What they did is they essentially animated these just insane, awesome visual animations in these really transfixing worlds that, keep your entire attention. And I should say, I definitely watched this entire show. Let's say it's a 6 hour show after drinking a very special ceremonial tea. And I was just with it and I watched the whole program. And there's an episode at the very end where you get this imagery of the passing of the torch between parent and child, because you have the main character speaking with his actual mother, the actual voice actor speaking with his actual mother, who at the time of release, I believe, had passed of a type of cancer. And so this conversation was largely about death. It was largely about how we cope with it, processing, and experiencing death, because death is a very important thing um, in a life to experience, especially for those who know it's coming and they kind of have that time. Which, when you have a degenerative disease like a cancer, you certainly have that time to reflect. And this conversation was just, it was beautifully present and emotionally true. And I really enjoyed watching the visual of young character growing with his adult mother. As he grows, she starts to shrink and age, and he's there visually for her as she passes. And as she passes, the character becomes pregnant and the cycle begins again, giving birth as the conversation continues. And now you see it's the character who is aging and becoming older, and the child, their mother, becoming the next adult and then caring for him when it's his time. And the entire time they're having this, again, very beautiful conversation about death. And at the end of that show, and there were many other aspects, but that one certainly left an impact. That and another episode about a concept called mind prison, which is fascinating. But after watching all of that, I became overwhelmed with this feeling of wanting to connect, wanting to reach out and touch in some way a person who I care about. So I started calling people. Mind you, it was like late. It's like 10 p.m. ish. And I'm just calling everyone in my phone book until someone answers. And lo and behold, the person who answers is the perfect person. I won't give his name, but he's a really good friend of mine I used to work with. And he and I have always had really good conversations. He's a very interesting, very genuine person. And when I called him, I told him that I was reaching out. told him what I was kind of going through, and that my thought was that I kind of had this realization that it's important to reach out to people because you never know how long you have with them. And having lost my grandfather earlier that year, I was still very much wrapped up in my grief, and that thought maybe was with me the whole time, but developed further after having gone through that experience of watching that show, thinking those thoughts, and then taking that step of reaching out. So I told him that this was what I was trying to do, and he said it's funny that I mentioned that he was hit by a car that day, full speed, hit by a car, and I kind of wept, and I told him, "I'm so happy you called. I'm so happy you're all right." And it was fascinating that of all the people who could have answered, that the literal personification of what I was thinking answered. He almost didn't have another day for me to call him. If the car had hit a little different angle, a little bit faster, he could have died. And that thought was so affirming for me and my thought process for what I was trying to achieve. So after our really long conversation that night, I told him good night, and the next day, I began to call more people. And I did this every day. And I also started working on myself, trying to reflect. I took this course. I don't love Jordan Peterson, but I did take his course, the self-authoring course. It was actually very good. Um, and as I was writing, there was this one section where it asked to talk about people that you admire and what qualities you admire in them. So as I started calling people, I actually brought up the fact at some point in the conversation, I said, I don't want this to come off a certain way, but I wrote about you actually. And I would tell each friend or associate, old coworker, family, I would tell them what were the three things or two things that about them I really felt inspired by, I really admired. And most of them were so shocked. Like they did not see that in themselves. They felt really honored that that's what I saw in them. And as I started reaching out and talking to more people and being vulnerable and opening up with them, getting them to open up, I started realizing that most people want to reach out. Most people want you to reach out. But the fact is, we get so wrapped up in our daily lives, our schedules, the things going on that are bringing us down, our depression, our anxiety, our stress, and our own overthinking about the connections we have with each other. They oftentimes would think the very same thing, that if I hadn't reached out, maybe I just wasn't interested in being their friend anymore. And that's just not the case. I wanted to talk to them. I just didn't know I had to take the lead. And so this story kind of comes around to a point, and that is if in your life there's someone you really care about, or if you've been isolated, or if you've been wrapped up in your own head, maybe reach out. Reach out to a friend, a family member, even if it's been a long time, and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. How are you? I want to catch up. Most of them are going to really appreciate it. And don't just text them, call them. Phone calls, that was weird. I also went into phone calls during this whole experience, and they're so much more free and genuine than texting. Man, when did we stop calling as much? I feel like, especially in my generation, texting is so much more normal, but you can't fully catch up with someone that way. And if they say they're fine, you can't hear in the tone of their voice that they're not. And it's important, if you really care, that you give people the space to be themselves and to be honest and vulnerable, and hopefully in return, it's given to you. It's not a given, but sometimes kindness begets kindness. And I just think it was a really amazing experience. I did fall off the habit a little bit. I'm going to try picking it up again. But I did it for a long time. I would call someone at least every other day and then at least once a week. It has fallen out of habit. Life caught up. Distractions set in. And I forgot to do it. But I'm going to start again. And I think it's important to just pick up the phone and call the person you care about. And just say, hey, don't expect anything from the conversation. Just check in. I think you'll be surprised by the results. But that's my story for the day. I'm just gonna end it there. But if you liked the story, if you want more maybe stories about things I've been through or lessons I've learned, or if you're just interested in engaging about your experience maybe during COVID, during that isolation or current isolation that just modern society puts us through without a pandemic. So if you're interested in that, please do comment. I really do crave comments. I think they're way more interesting than likes and subscribes, but I know that's what helps the algorithm. So if you want to do that too, that's awesome. But thank you for listening. If you did pop in, I really appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time, I suppose. Bye.